There we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our June meeting. Glad to have you here with us. And we've got a very special fun event tonight with Trent and Kristen Blizzard. And they're joining us from their home, which is not in Colorado. I'm sorry, Kristen, where do you guys reside?
We're in Glenwood Springs, Colorado.
Okay. So you're not too far from us, just on the other side of the hill. It's lovely. We do have a few announcements to make before we get going, and then we're going to have a 4A announcement after the meeting, so stick around. And if you want the next 4A information, we'll give that last. So I'm Alyssa, I'm the PPMS secretary, and I'm going to give you over to our VP. That would be Jennifer Bell.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. Pikes Peak Mycological Society in Colorado Springs, but we serve all of you everywhere. And we're very happy to bring some very special guests tonight. You guys are like the Time Life Illustrated. You're like a megalopolis of foraging and 4A stuff and information. And, you know, I mean, the stuff that we're interested in is so nichey. And you guys are helping us a lot, and we appreciate that. Now, I'm going to go over the stuff that you have going on, and if I'm missing something, let me know, okay? So you have a website, and you sell merch and gear, and you had a book that came out last year with recipes and mini bios of some of the people that you've met along your way. You have maps that you come out with every single year, and you have a blog, and you have this. Is this a magazine or a book, or I'm not sure what it is. But we like Modern Forager, and we're very happy you could be here tonight. A lot of people are really interested in what you have to say. I mean, we're like crawling the walls this time of year. You know what it's like. Now, the two of you are married and you're partners in this business. So before you dig into the meat of your presentation, who does what?
Good question. I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen. Good to see you. Trent's the master when it comes to this Zooming and presentations. He loves to teach, and he's really good at it. I prefer to hide behind the scenes usually. So, you know, Modern Forager is our passion project, really. Trent and I are web designers by trade. That's how we pay our bills. But we, you know, started blogging about our adventures, I don't know, 7 years ago or something. And then kind of the maps were really the big deal for us. Trent started making burn morel maps for us, for our own adventures. And they turned into just something more, and people love them, and it's been pretty fun. So who does what? Gosh, I try to manage social media, you know, do blogging when we can. Trent's doing a lot of this educational stuff, and both of us just kind of tag team stuff if we can, because it's hard to manage it all.
Kristen picks the dirty mushrooms. I wash them. She
Whatever.
puts more salt in everything than me.
Yeah, that's true.
She makes it tasty, and she makes it pretty.
Yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. We're a tag team. We know, we haven't killed each other yet, surprisingly.
Thank you so much for being here, and I'm pleased that I've been able to foray with you and show us some of our area, and I'm sure we'll do that more in the future. Yeah. And Kristen and Trent Blizzard, thanks for being here tonight, and have at it. Burn Morels is everyone's, it's the holy grail, at least this time of year, at least until the Matsutake starts to bloom. So tell us where to go and what to do and how to get there and how to be safe. And the microphone is yours, buddy.
Thanks. I think what we're going to do, I do most of the presenting, and Kristen hangs in the chat quite a bit. So one thing we would encourage you to do is chat in here, ask any questions, follow-up questions, disagreements. We'll make sure we address all that. That you put right in the YouTube. I think it's called chat over in YouTube. So that's really helpful. And thanks for having us. We had a good time last summer doing some forays with you and your group. It was awesome. It's fun to come from the western slope over to Colorado Springs because you have all those ponderosa trees, and trees are what it's all about. And out here in Glenwood Springs, we don't have quite the ponderosa population, so you have a slightly different slice of mushrooms there in the Springs area in Pikes Peak that we don't get here. So I'm sure we'll be back in July. I'm looking for be it the lobsters, or maybe some white kings if we're lucky, or hedgehogs or chanterelles. There's a lot to do out there. So hopefully you'll be seeing us this summer. But where we won't be this spring is in your area looking for burn morels, because most of the fires happened kind of outside of your area last summer, which in a way I think you can be really grateful for that the fires didn't touch your local forest so much. They tend to be up north a little bit of you, but we'll take a look at that. So I think we're ready to get started here. Feel free, like I say, to hop in there. I'm still looking over here at the chat. I don't see any chat in there. I think it's running a few, maybe 60 seconds behind us. So I'll watch that. Let me share my screen here. I've got my presentation queued up here, and you should be able to see that. And this started for us, this whole burn morel scene started for us 7-8 years ago. And we were really getting into hunting mushrooms, and we kind of heard about these crazy morels in the West that grew. And we hadn't experienced them here in Colorado. We started doing research, and I started making maps of where we were going to go. And it was pretty exciting to make maps in the winter and do all that research and drive out. In this case, we would go to Oregon the first couple of years, Oregon and Idaho. And we would step out of our car into a burn that we had mapped out and start finding these beautiful mushrooms. And we got better and better at kind of mapping ahead of time and knowing where to go. And people started, asking questions, and they wanted our maps. So we just turned it into a website and started publishing the map and talking about burn morels a lot. And we made this little book. I call it a book. Kristen thinks it's a magazine, so it depends who you ask. It's magazine size. Let's be really clear. It's pretty flimsy, but it's got a lot of good info in it. So we just started kind of getting into burn morels, and every year we travel around the West looking for them. So that's kind of our story. And we typically go 2 or 3 weeks. Although we had some interesting experiences 2 years ago, I'll talk about in a minute. So let me hop over here and go to the next screen. A little bit, there's some pictures of us I should have been showing. Those are our 2 dogs, Benzie and Lulu. They love the burns. They get pretty dirty in them. And you can see we get pretty dirty too. It's a dirty hobby. You ruin a lot of clothes out there. I want to jump into morels though. Let's kind of quit beating around the bush, and I want to start the presentation. I'm going to talk about morels, and then I'm going to talk about kind of burns and where morels grow in burns, and then we're going to switch to more on the ground and talk about how to get in the burn and actually find them on site. So with the morels, I got kind of some things that we have to agree on. I feel like number one, they're polymorphic, and that means that they have a lot of different sizes and shapes and colors, and you just can't look at a morel and know what species it is necessarily. They're very dynamic the way they look and the way they change. They have many shapes. They're very predictable. They behave in a very predictable fashion. However, they also behave unpredictably. Once you realize how they work, they can surprise you. And they even have a sense of irony in that. And the example is you can go hunting morels all day. You get back to your car and you know where you find your first and only morel, right? Like right in the parking lot. The first year we went burn morel hunting, we went out and traveled all over the West and came back home. And that very day we found a big, beautiful morel right in our backyard. That's kind of irony. Classifying them by species can be a daunting task, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but it's not something I want to dive too deep into unless you have genetic testing and microscopy skills. It's difficult to identify them to the species. They are mycorrhizal. Now, there's going to be mycologists that are going to probably disagree with me, and rightfully so. But when I say morels are mycorrhizal, what I mean is If you want to hunt them and find them, they have an intimate relationship with trees, and that is how you're going to be successful finding them. Even if there might be some non-mycorrhizal aspects to them, I don't think those are relevant for finding them. You should understand them as a mycorrhizal mushroom. And finally, morels, they shop local. And what I mean by that is they're different everywhere. And you got to pay attention to anyone giving you morel hunting advice. And the reason is, if they're from different parts of the country, their advice is not going to work here in Colorado. And even in Colorado, when we say they're local, we've got the yellow riparian mushrooms, we've got the black ones that are going to grow in the aspens, and the conifers a little later in the season. Then we've got the burn morels, a third specific type that are going to follow their own rules. So those people that tell you, look in apple orchards, look under ash trees, look in cottonwoods, they may be totally wrong or they may be right, but you got to pay attention to where they have their information from. My final point on this is when I talk about morels, and often, I'll be like, oh, here's where you find them. And somebody will be like, oh, I found them, underneath my hot water tank in my backyard. And that happens. They're unpredictable. But here's what I'm really focused on is this idea of a bell curve. And I want to guide you to the place where you're most likely to find the most of them. And I try to really tune out and pay attention to these things that can distract us. And if you focus on places where you might find them, and maybe some people find them, and in the past you've heard about them, they're hard to find there. So I really want to focus on what I know of, like where they absolutely exist. I call that the bell curve. We want to focus on the big bulk of where we typically find these special morels. Now, bird morels. There's three general type of morels here in Colorado. We've got the riparian, the black, and the bird. Now, burn morels grow only in the western U.S. They only grow with conifer forests and with conifer trees, and they only grow after a fire. Those are like three big truths. However, I notice I got some asterisks in there. They're unpredictable. There have been, some reports of them growing maybe in aspens or maybe in some other non-conifer forest. Pretty hard to chase that down. They only grow in the western U.S. That's true, except they have been found 5 times east of, I want to say the Rockies. I'm including the Black Hills in the western U.S. They've only been found 5 times that they've been genetically tested east of, let's say, the Mississippi. So really, we're talking about a Western phenomenon. We're talking Colorado, Wyoming, to some degree, the South Dakota, Arizona, New Mexico, and west from there, all the way to obviously California, Washington, and Oregon. And they only grow after a fire. These specific species of morels are only found the year after a fire, maybe the second and third year too, for sure. But after that, they hunker down, and you will not see them until the next burn rolls through that particular area. Again, with some very, very, very few exceptions. So that's what they are. Here's what they're not. These are not morels that are growing somewhere where it burned. If you find some around a campfire, those aren't burned morels. If you find some in a deciduous forest that got burnt, those are not burn morels, most likely. Those are just morels that happen to like that. Burn morels are a special type that only grow in these habitat. They're reliable, and they grow in huge numbers. So that's what we're talking about here. I'm just going to pop over and look at any questions that seem to be popping up in here. Oh, hi, I see you, Robert. Hi, Robert. All right. And see, already Robert disagrees, and they definitely can be found in some other trees. However, I will say, like I said, I would be very hesitant to build a strategy on finding them outside of conifers. I find that to be the exception. Robert, feel free to post your exactly what tree and where somebody found them. We can maybe kind of dig into that deeper a little bit later. But that's where you're going to want to definitely be focused here when you're looking to gather them. Now, here's the 5 species that you're going to find. The 5th one is up in the air. I think there've been some more DNA testing come through in the last year or two that have maybe shown that Brunea grows in both places. But these are the main ones if you really care. I've got a link in there. You can search up burn morel species and kind of read more about these and look at the research that is there. Okay, so that's it for Morels, kind of as a topic. The next topic I want to move into is strategy on how to kind of find these guys. And I'll start with the where. This is a map of Colorado, and all it is the forests in Colorado. Each of the big forest services are represent there, and those are the big tracts of public land with big conifer forests at high elevation where you're going to be finding these guys. You can ignore the grasslands on the eastern half of the state; those aren't going to be what host. But this is generally where you're going to be picking all the time, or in these types of zones. Now, more specifically, you got to find birds. So in many ways, that's one of the bigger problems. And here in the West, it's not just burns. Like, there's all these sources. I have 4 maps in here that have burns. Modern Forager is our product. The other 3 are also have burns mapped on them. And the real problem is finding the right burn. And in the last couple of years, that kind of devolves into 2 or 3 issues. The big issue is we have dozens, if not hundreds, of burns across Colorado and really in most states. And they can be overwhelming. You've kind of got to take, millions of acres of burns and try to reduce it down to 1 or 2 burns you want to visit that are at the right elevation. And then you got to know where to go in the burn. So this is where you're going to start. Big picture, you're going to get burns. Our map and Modern Forager, they're $39. The first year you buy it, we have a smaller renewal rate, and we list all the burns in every Western state, and then we curate them down and kind of show you our favorites. But there's a lot of other places to get burn data if you want to spend the time and Google it. It's absolutely there. All right, we got a few more people popping in here. Black Hills Mushrooms, howdy. Good to see you guys. Another accomplished mushroom hunter here on YouTube watching this, and feel free to weigh in on your experience, because you'll have a unique one in your local habitat. So we found the burns, and I'm going to jump into some maps here in a minute. Let me just pop back one real quick. I feel like I might have missed something here. No, I think, there we go. I think I covered it. All right. Now I'm going to start slowing down and looking at some things here. These are my elevation guidelines for Colorado. Now, these are like guidelines, and I find every season is different. And we see that with a lot of our local foraged goods. They can easily fluctuate a couple of weeks during the season for earlier or later, depending on the weather patterns and the snowfall. It feels like we had a smaller snowfall this spring, which would have indicated earlier mushrooms. However, it feels like we've had a cooler spring than, for instance, last year, which has kind of slowed down the progression here and helped the water stay up in the mountains right now. But generally, May, 75 to 8,500 feet. And that's near the end of May. And I usually start looking out here about 8,000 feet is where I get really interested. I'll talk about why in a minute. And then in June is probably the prime month where you're going to typically be 85 to 9,500. Of course, it can fluctuate. And in July, you're going to go above 9,500. In August, and you can easily hunt into August if it rains very easily at, say, 10,000 and above feet. So you're going to be able to have a very long season, even with just the burn morels, starting, I'm going to guess, around Memorial Day weekend, right at the end of May out here, and maybe earlier in some lower elevation spots. Although those are a little harder to hit, and I haven't seen anybody hitting them, or if they are, they're smart enough not to talk about where they're finding them yet. And there are those people for sure that might be out there getting hundreds of pounds, and they're not going to tell you. So check out this picture. We'll talk about soil temps in this context. These mushrooms really like a soil temp in, let's say, the low 50s. And I have 2 pictures here. I've been poking thermometers in the soil, just testing, and I've found it to be a relatively unreliable factor. I can't say that it really guides me a whole lot, as I've seen it from this picture on the left. It was 57.8 degrees. And the picture on the right was 48.5. That's a pretty big fluctuation out in the forest. I still do it. Now, when people tell you, oh, it's, they like 55 degrees. Oh, cool. What time of day did you measure that? Was it in the shade? Was it north or south facing? Not that that necessarily matters. And look at the picture on the right. I think it's interesting if you examine it for a minute versus the picture on the left. Look at that, how deep the thermometer is in the soil, same thermometer. I could have shoved it another inch deeper. And the deeper you go, the temperature changes. So that's another factor. Like one person may be going 2 inches in the soil and saying, oh, it's 55 degrees. The next guy goes 4 inches and says it's 48. And if you don't do it the same every time, you get a different number. So there's a lot of weird factors with measuring soil temp that I think are challenging. And this picture illustrates it, but that's the range that I see them in. Now, I want to look at this picture on the right. This picture was taken at 8,500 feet, maybe even a little lower, pretty close to 85, give or take 100, on, let me look, June 21st in Colorado last year, 2 years ago. The picture on the left, this doesn't make any sense. This was taken at about the same elevation, maybe even a little higher, and it was taken June 6th. So in a 2-week period, we went down in elevation and the temperature went down. Well, south versus north, sunny versus shady. I didn't stick the thermometer in all the way here, but here's what really happened is on, probably like the 17th of June, I'm guessing, I don't know. We had this huge rainstorm. And what happened was about June 6th, June 7th, we started at 8,000 feet. Maybe a little, maybe 82, I don't know, 81, on a pretty sunny north-facing slope. And we started picking them and they sucked. Sunny meant it was ashy on the ground and they were dirty and they had been rained on and they were really dirty mushrooms. But we picked them anyways because they were the first of the season in 2019. And then we got this big rain and it was a really cold rain, like at least an inch. It just maybe 2 inches. I don't know. It just soaked the soil hard. Temperatures dropped and everything stopped for a couple of days while the soil temperature came back up. And then right around this day, I want to say June 21st, this first flush at 8,500 feet exploded. And we got a lot of them from that change in weather pattern. And these were all in the shady areas. So 2 weeks earlier, we were in the more sunny area, a little lower elevation, but not much, only maybe 200 feet. 2 weeks later, we're up in the shade and we're picking them really beautiful mushrooms like this. First flush. 2 days later, the aspens start giving up their, and maybe somebody can put this in the chat. The aspens started giving up their cotton. I forget the word for that blows through the woods and it stuck to all these mushrooms. And there were millions of mushrooms just covered with this like aspen pollen, like the white stuff the aspen trees release, which is kind of sucks because they're hard to get clean. Now I'm going to jump here. This picture was taken a week later, maybe 10 days later. This picture was taken June 30th, same elevation, 8,400 feet. This was the second flush. So what happened is around June 21st, there was a big flush. The aspen pollen covered it all, kind of made it hard to pick. And then about 7 or 8 days later, this big second flush came through. They grew really big, really fast. The temperatures were really warm and nice. They didn't have a lot of aspen fluff on them. And we harvested like crazy at about 8,500 feet. And then on June, this is July 5th. Yeah, this is a July 5th picture. Same spot. The third or fourth flush in this case came through. And these are the tomentosas that we want to pick, the kind of big beefy ones at 8,500 feet, right around July 4th, July 5th. So we stayed in this low elevation range and we picked between 82 and 85 from June 7th, June 6th to July 5th. And at July 5th, they were still going strong. We had to go on vacation or something, so we left town. So it's fun to visit this fire over and over and see these. Now onward with the season, let me show you what happened next. So let's see. Then we went up, we came back and in, let's see, let me look. Week 8, that would have been August, the first week of August. We go up to 10,000 feet and they're all up there and big numbers. Same thing, like this is August 5th. And these are really big tomentosa mushrooms. They look kind of old here, but they're not. They're really nice mushrooms, firm and big and meaty and delicious. And we picked these for the next week up at 10,200 feet, and it got really dry and they just kind of stopped growing. And we kind of called it after that. But the point being, if you get the weather, you can keep going up in elevation. And also within the weather, you can have like 3 flushes come off in the same area. So you might end up picking the same area over and over. It's very possible. I want to show you now real quick a map. This is the burn we were in. Yeah, here it is. So this is the Lake Christine burn. So I'm going to just bop in here. And this is near us in Glenwood. And so what's fun for us is normally we travel all around the country. We hunt these in, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, California, especially. I've really been wanting to go to Arizona, but they haven't gotten the kind of rain. New Mexico had a good fire this year we couldn't go to. But here you can see over a 2-month period, these are all our tracks through the fire. And we started like down here in the left, and we kept looping around, and we picked a bunch here, and then we were over in here. And this is all that kind of 4-week period. And when you dive in deeper, you can see the tracks that we did like day after day after day with us and our friends through these areas, picking multiple flushes as they came up. We often were coming back a week later and going through the same territory. So that was kind of an 8-week season for us. And then, then we got up into this spot and did a lot of hunting up in here. And we hit this over and over, and we kept moving over the side of the hill. And there must have been, a million mushrooms in there. We didn't come close to picking anywhere near this fire. You can see we hardly went up in here. This was the 10,200 zone that we picked a lot up in here later in the summer up at the top of the hill. So that's the fire. Let me see if there's any questions in here before I move on. And next I kind of want to change gear a little bit. Give me a sec to put this back. Okay, good. It looks like we're good on the questions in there. Hi, Levi. Catkins, yes, catkins. Thank you, Levi. Those are those white blowy things that stick to morel mushrooms in June that come off aspen trees, and they kind of suck. They don't really matter in the kitchen, but they're just annoying when you pick, especially when they've covered all the mushrooms. So here's a satellite picture of a burn. The red line is the burn outline. And this is an example of where we don't want to go burn hunting. So now, we've talked about the morels. We've talked about, you got to find your maps, a little bit about the season. But when you sit down and say, hey, where am I going to go? You're going to research on a map before you go. This is less than ideal territory. Now, you're going to find something here. We picked this fire for a couple hours, maybe 2. We got maybe 2 gallons of mushrooms. It wasn't great. Not what we were looking for. Now, this fire is that Lake Christine fire. And what I want you to see in here is look how thick these trees are. This is what you want to go find. And this is unusually beautiful tree coverage for a fire. If you can find this is where you want to go. Now, if I go to the next screen, I just zoomed in there. You can see what it looks like on Google Satellite, all the kind of big, deep, dark, kind of big forest in there. When this burns, this is where we often find our mushrooms. And this is at 10,000 feet. We got a couple questions about rain and seasons. I'll get to that in a sec. I want to talk about trees. I want to talk about trees first. So we want thick trees, and this is a tree map of Colorado with all the different types of trees. My favorite forest is going to be the spruce fir forest, this kind of lime green. And there's a lot of that in there. I think on the next screen, I've isolated that on this map. However, you also have the mixed conifer, which is excellent. and you have the ponderosa pine, and you have the lodgepole pine. Those are our predominant forests. I'm just going to come over here. I've got another map. I'm going to load it up here. I think it is loaded up. Yep. Okay. So I do a lot of map work on the trees, and these trees grow at different elevations. So let me just pop in here and show you what's next. This is the lodgepole pine. Okay, so I'm going to change this view now and bring this over here. And what you're seeing here is a tree map that I have. And this tree map is on Modern Forager for all of our Burn Morel members. These are the trees I have turned on: redwood, spruce, pine, larch, hemlock, Doug fir, and fir. And some of those aren't here. Obviously, I'm looking at redwood, larch, hemlock are going to be, West Coast. But here, what I've done is in Colorado, I've put in the big fires, and you can see the perimeters here. And what'll happen is if you look at the trees and talk about kind of what we like, I'm going to start at the lower elevation, I think. And often what that means is going to be the pine. I'm going to leave that checked. I'm going to uncheck that. So it's going to be the ponderosa pine. Let me turn off the rest too. Okay, so now here it is with all the pine. Uh-oh, now I'll have to wait for it to come back. Where's L? Lodgepole and ponderosa. So give me a minute for this map to reload. I had it loaded ahead of time to keep it. So let me zoom in on, I don't know that I want to zoom in. Just want to turn off lodgepole. But what you'll see is, I guess we're going to zoom. There we go. This is the ponderosa pine. Sorry, this map has a ton of data. It takes a little while to load. It's a pretty awesome map. But this is the ponderosa tree footprint. And you can see on this burn right here, I think that's called the East Cameron burn. I always have to look them up. I don't always remember the names. You can see the ponderosas down here on the eastern side and a little stretch right here. Now the ponderosa is going to be a lower elevation pine. That's where you're typically, if you're going to find early mushrooms, they're going to be in the ponderosas. I don't have a lot of experience in them because I live over here in the West and there's hardly any of them. But that's where I would be in the earlier elevations. And these are going to probably be below 8,000 feet. I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to turn on the lodgepole for a minute. Here's the lodgepole pine. That moves up in elevation. Now, lodgepole is my least favorite pine to hunt in, or least favorite conifer. And they will grow in lodgepole. However, what the areas that make me nervous with lodgepole are the ones that are like exclusively lodgepole pine forests. I like the mix. So I'm okay with having pine, but I want to see them mixed in with other types of conifer trees. Now, right above that, usually we see the Doug fir. So here's the Doug fir map. That's going to be it's going to start in the ponderosas and then usually go a little higher in elevation. We don't have as many of those over here in the Western Slope where I live either. And I know, Mushroom Shop Local in, say, Arizona, you're going to really want to hunt Doug firs. Maybe in Oregon, they're not going to be as desirable as a monolithic forest. Here in Colorado, I think they're at a lower elevation, and you might find them in Doug firs. I think my favorites though are going to be the firs and the spruces. So these are let me start with the firs. So these are the mixed firs, not the Doug firs. And you can see inside this fire here, right here. Can you guys see my cursor? Okay, let me see if I can ramp up the cursor so it's a little bit easier for me to hover over it. I think this tool here does it. Yeah, right here, this is going to be a higher elevation part of the fire. The firs are usually going to start at 8,500 or 9,000 feet or something like that. And then if you turn those off and turn on the spruce, these are going to be the kind of highest elevation areas. And I'm usually personally trying to focus in June on those kind of fir spruce mixed forest down here in this fire. You can see it right here. This is the Mullen fire up here, and it has spruce right here and right here. And these are the three areas I would typically try to focus my attention on, because I really like the spruce and the fir mix. I'll throw in the fir in there. However, if you've got to undo those, and you've got to pick just your Doug fir and your ponderosa, I may have to. Here's a zoom in. You can find all these areas with the Doug firs in them as well in this map. So that was just a little bit about trees, but I'm always paying attention to trees. And just to cap it, I will definitely look in ponderosas early in the season if you have them near you, and these burns do. That might be where you want to be right now, starting to hit the ponderosas around 7,000 to 8,000 feet. I don't have as much experience in them. Same with the Doug fir, which are going to be on the kind of upper elevations of the ponderosas. The Doug firs will come in more predominantly. And then when, say, the second week of June rolls here, you'll be in the upper elevation for firs and spruces. Let me just make sure that I'm doing okay on these questions. Great, Robert, I love your question on where the north aspect, do you find the best host trees? Yeah, thanks, that's a great one. Yeah, it seems like my favorite aspect to hunt is north or east. And the firs and the spruces especially favor that cooler side of the mountains. And if you are walking down a canyon, an east-west canyon, and one side's north and one side's south, that north side is going to have an entirely different type of tree than that south side. So I'm typically looking at the northern slopes, and I'm typically avoiding the southern slopes. However, an eastern slope and a western slope will have a lot of northern southern exposures in them, and they can also do well. But typically I am focusing on the north here for most of my hunting. Yeah, that tree map, that is pretty cool, isn't it? I got pretty geeked out. I spent a lot of time this winter making that tree map, and I love it. I use the tree map also for just all of my hunting in Colorado. I'm always looking for like Engelmann spruce, for instance, or like ponderosas that I want to go hunt for lobsters, for instance. Thanks, Kristen's answering some questions there. Good too. Excellent. So rain, you asked how long after a rain is ideal to hunt. I'm going to say a couple days. 2 days is probably perfect. If we got a rain tonight, I probably wouldn't want to go tomorrow, but I'd want to go the day after. However, if it's warm out, the mushrooms will grow very quickly in 24 hours. It could rain today, and tomorrow there could be just lots of nice mushrooms, because these guys with the right conditions, I feel like, can achieve about 3/4 of their size in 24 hours. If it's colder or drier, they go slower. The real problem is when there's no rain. And I think what happens is, especially here in Colorado, when we go about 2 weeks without rain, the ground gets really dry, and I feel like it gets drier deeper into the ground. And morels have this, I'm not a mycologist, but before it fruits, it has to get ready to fruit underground. And that's easily a 2-week period. And if you don't get 2 to 3 weeks of wet ground, it won't get to the point where now it's ready to fruit. So my experience is, runoff is now, if we don't get rain when runoff starts by the time the mushrooms are where they should. During runoff, they're growing underground, and it's usually a couple weeks after runoff when they pop. And runoff alone is just rarely enough in Colorado to make them pop. You need a good rain after runoff to get them to pop. I would say that if you go 2 weeks without a rain, things go downhill really fast. And I feel like if they don't pop when the window happens, they won't. So right now it's like maybe 7,000 feet is where they're going to be at right now. And it's pretty moist. So I'm optimistic. I'm also optimistic at 8 and 9 and 10 feet, because it's pretty moist in a lot of these burns up there right now. As opposed to if we go 2 weeks without rain, everything will start changing quickly. 4 weeks is tough. It puts a lot under, and then you're into this thing people call microclimates, and people will tell you, oh yeah, I find mushrooms and it hasn't rained in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I'm looking at microclimates. Very true. There are places, northern exposures, fresh water, spring water runoff, and you're going to find some mushrooms in microclimates. However, that's a code word. Microclimates is a code word for I'm a really good mushroom hunter, and I found a few in some weird spots. It's a code word to say you're just not going to walk into the woods and fill your bucket. You're going to work hard looking for really precise little areas like holes in the ground to go pick a few mushrooms. It's not the same. And that's what I'm talking about, are big growths, not like I find a few here. So microclimates is a loaded word, and the more rain, the better. All right, so I hit trees. Let's see what we got next here. Just a quick checklist now. So you've done your armchair research, you found your burns, you've looked on these maps. I'm going to pop over and show you a map now. Let me pull it in here. This is a map of, this is one of our Modern Forager maps. You know, we start with a Google map. Here's the Google map of the burn. This is the Cameron Peak burn. Cameron Peak, it's 322 square miles. You have access on all four sides, although it's closed right now, I believe. And I break down the different elements of this fire here. But what you're going to want to do is find your spots and figure out how to get into them. And that's what you have a Google map that has roads. We run the satellite map, so you can look on here and, you know, look in and say, oh, I really like the trees right here. They're really nice. There's a lot of potential right there, maybe. The Forest Service map, that was really critical. This is going to be the map that you plan with because it has the good roads. I will caution you that Google Map is nice, but I wouldn't plan driving into the forest on Google Maps. It just doesn't have the kind of road detail that you're looking for to kind of get into the forest, you know, to find what you're looking for. So I use this map a lot to plan routes in the forest, the Forest Service map. Now, the other elements that I'm looking for here, to kind of do my planning is, as I look at a map like this, I'm trying to isolate elevation. I'm trying to isolate aspect, and I'm trying to isolate steepness, tree cover, and legality. So let me hit each one of those. I am looking for the correct kind of elevation for where I'm hunting. Now, inside of our maps, we do these detail maps, and this is that fire. This is the western zone of that fire. I think I'll do this one, the middle zone. And when I say detail maps and for elevation, what I usually do is I run these gradients through the fire that help me easily say, okay, blue is 85 to 9,000 feet. That's what I'm looking for on blue areas or orange areas. So I'm often, when I'm trying to find a place to hunt, and you will do this too, we're going to say, okay, I'm going the first week of June. I really need to find something at 8,500 feet. So you got to really study the maps and find them. These gradients can help you find those. In this case, the blue starts at 8,000 and it goes to 9, and then it becomes red. And I think from 9 to 10 goes to yellow in this map. So I do have directions inside our system how you can build these gradient maps yourself to more easily spot elevation. But that's the first thing. I'm looking for specific elevations in a burn. Now this burn is kind of fun that way because here's the eastern part of the burn. Here's that blue 8,000 line. And there's this big area, national forest over here below 8,000 feet filled with ponderosas. If we go back to the tree map, and this is where we're going to focus our early season hunting is right here. And I do have those tree maps in here as well. That's the spruce map, pine map. Here's the ponderosa map for that fire. See it, we can zoom in here, but that shows you the ponderosas. So let me close that. That's elevation. We want to find the target elevation, and then we want to look for aspect. So I often then will zoom into these maps here and try to find exposures that are that are like north facing exposures. So on this hillside here, here's a hill at 8,800 feet. And this hill that runs down, it runs down to this creek right here. That's a north facing hill. I'm going to be much more excited to hunt this than I am to come over the other side of the hill and hunt this side of the hill coming down into this creek, because that's a southern exposure. And I just don't have near as much luck. I bet if we go to satellite, you often can see the difference. It's not so apparent here. That does look pretty treed, but usually this side has more trees on it as well, a denser tree cover, strict only because it's north facing. So I look for that aspect of north and south. And then I look for steepness. Looking at this map, like this area right here, looks like really good hunting. This is fairly flat. It drops off this way. It looks like it's going up in elevation. So this is a east facing slope, which is great. And see the wide lines or the gaps here between the topography lines means it's relatively flat. And that's going to be an enjoyable place to hunt. If you come over here and look like right in here, on this west facing slope that goes from about 9,500 to 99, this looks a lot steeper, and this is going to be a lot less enjoyable for you to kind of climb on. I'm here to tell you, mushrooms love steep territory. They don't care. They'll grow on anything like that. And you'll find a lot of them. It's just exhausting to search in the steep territory, and it's kind of dangerous too. So I'm often trying to find big areas of relatively flat land. Now, the mapping software I use is cool. When I find these spots, I can actually put an algorithm and say, I want to gray out any land that is above a 25% slope, any land that's a southern aspect, any land that has 50% less tree cover, and it'll show me just the hot spots that have good trees, flat northern slopes, which is kind of what you're honing in on here. You're going to find morels all over the place in these burns, but when you're planning where you're going to drive to and where you're going to park and where you're going to look, you're going to want to determine that before you drive in. Next one we're looking at is legality. So, this is a Forest Service map. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And this will have boundaries in it of non-Forest Service, but even the Forest Service map is not going to show very well the blocks of private property that are in here. And you can see them in here. You can see the home sites here. I'll look right here. This Turner Hill right here, you see all those little dots? Those are people's homes. And there's a good chance this is private land. So that's the other thing you're going to want to pay attention to as you're planning your trip. Here I have an example map in here. So this is a private land map, and what you've got there is the same fire. Green means it's public. So this burn is filled with a lot of public property. It's all this green area in here. If you zoom in here, if you zoom in right here and look a little closer, there's a big blue area, and blue is going to be a state land, I believe, which is you can't hunt. And then there's clear right in here, these boxes without the green overlay. This is private land, so you don't want to get in here. So when you're doing your planning, and I said earlier, like, oh, this zone here has a lot of ponderosa, you're going to want to focus on these areas that you're allowed to hunt in, not these private land areas. And one of the risks you want to watch out for, often when a road crosses into private land, these Forest Service roads, there's a good likelihood there's a gate there. So you never know until you kind of get there and look. Although there are some good trail, sometimes hiking websites that talk about hiking trails or ATV trails have a lot of good information on access to help you get into these. But you'll want to pay attention to and look for private land. Now, here's the rules. Let's talk about the land. You may not hunt in a national park in Colorado, and there's, I think, 4 of them. Rocky Mountain National Park, Grand Mesa, Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and I'm missing one. Maybe somebody will type it in there. Robert shared in there. I'm just looking. Flatland below steep land has always done well. Yeah, good drainage. I think when you get into those areas that have lots of drainage coming down into them, that's pretty good. I would always prefer to hunt flatland if I could, but when in a competitive environment, or if it's been picked over, or if it's just not there, sometimes you just got to go into the steeps. All right. Don't forget to pop your questions in there if you have any. So you can't hunt on national park at all. You can hunt on forest land with permits. Every forest is going to have its own permitting rules in Colorado, and most of them will require that you get a permit, and but not every one of them. And most of them will sell you a commercial permit, about half of them, but not all of them. So if you're going to get larger amounts or commercial amounts, you should check in with the forest where you're picking and make sure you're compliant. BLM land, you can hunt personal quantities in without a permit. And state land, you cannot hunt in. And city, county land, it depends on the local ordinances. So really what we're looking for mostly is this green land here, which indicates Forest Service land, where we do most of our hunting. Right, so that's the legality of where you can hunt. The final piece is going to be access. Inside these forests, for instance, I think if I zoom out here and look at this again, for instance, this burn here, let me zoom out a little more. I think right here is an example. It says, if you see it, this is the Comanche Peak Wilderness area right here that burned. So what that means is practically it means two things. There's a giant area with no access, which means it's going to be really hard to hunt. There's going to be trails going in. And secondly, a lot of forests have rules prohibiting foraging in wilderness areas inside their forest. Every forest is different. In Colorado, most do not prohibit it, but they encourage a leave no trace ethics. And I think the fourth rule of leave no trace is leave everything behind. You're not really leaving a trace if you're packing out 25 gallons of Morels out of the forest. So we discourage the wilderness hunting. And besides, there's no access. You're going to want to find places you can drive into and then trails you can hike into. If you're a hiker, if you don't mind hiking a couple miles, you have a lot more land open to you, for sure. A lot of people don't go very far from their car when they're hunting for these guys. So being willing to hike in can open up a lot of really fun areas for you as well. All right. So that is kind of it, I think, for my kind of pre-planning. Let me drag this away here. I talk about all this already. A couple of map tips. Most of the good burns, it seems like, and frankly, most of the great mushroom hunting, I've been in Colorado. Cell phones don't work. There's not good, cell towers nearby, I guess. So you're going to want to have a strategy to have maps that work when your cell phone doesn't have coverage. I personally download the maps to my phone. I use Gaia. Onyx works. Caltopo works. There's other ones that work. I like Gaia because I can sync it with my hunting buddy. In this case, for instance, Kristen, she uses it too. We can each track our tracks and share our pictures that way. But you can print paper maps to the fire. For the first couple of years, I would use those gazetteers, Colorado gazetteers, and I would draw fire perimeters right on maps and go into the fire with a hand-drawn perimeter on a map. That works too. Definitely determine where to buy your permit before you go, keeping in mind you buy them at ranger stations, and ranger stations are almost never open on weekends, and they typically don't want to sell you a permit after 4 o'clock on a Friday. So pay attention to that. And then secondly, there's a lot of closures going on this year for different reasons. Without kind of getting into the politics of why they close it, I would encourage you to visit your Forest Service website and learn up what the rules are at the closures. Are there roads closed? Can you drive in? Here in Colorado, we're lucky. Some of our big fires are open. Others are closed. Others are partially open. It's kind of a mixed bag on kind of how you're gonna address that. But pay attention to closures. I hate to say that. The first couple of years, we rarely encountered a closed fire, except maybe in California. So when to go, that back to that rain question, they love rain, they love warmth, they love rain. They need some regular precipitation. But you can go anytime. You just kind of have to just find the right elevation to go. And now we're getting into this, like what happens when you arrive there. You know, I always encourage you, like, scout ahead of time. Have a route in that you're going to take, have a backup plan and a backup for your backup. You know, Kristen and I had a good example of this 3 years ago. We were going to a fire near Vale. We're driving into it, and boom, the road is closed. I don't remember why, but we couldn't get close to it. But we knew from our map study there were 2 other ways into this fire. We went to the next one, and we were able to drive in, and we were able to hunt this fire near Vale. And it's only because we kind of plan ahead different ways into the fire and different places we're going to go. I love to hunt big fires because I can have several different elevations and aspects to go check. But typically, we're going to move around. We're going to go into a burn, and we're going to stop, and we're going to have half a dozen places we might want to go check out because they look good. We're going to spend half an hour at each one. We're going to kind of go in a straight line, look around. If we don't find anything in half an hour, we're usually back in the car looking for a different habitat, either a different elevation, different aspect, or different trees. So we often move around until we start finding them, and then we kind of dig in and look harder. Now, when you're in the burn, let's show some pictures. Oh yeah, we did have to drive through a river for that burn, didn't we? I didn't think it was too sketchy. That road was really narrow, though. Kristen remembers that. We had to pass a Jeep to get to that burn. That was pretty hard to do on a narrow road. All right, so let's look at some pics. The other thing I say, which is different, we usually walk really fast when we're like in the scout mode. We're driving along, and like our rules kind of are like, if either one of us wants to stop, like, hey, I want to look right there. We stop, we jump out, we look for a minute, 10. If it's a good spot, we might look for 20. Get back in the car, and we keep going. We walk really fast. These guys are easy to spot. There's so many of them. These aren't like the riparian morels where you're hunting around cunningly for that 2 mushrooms you're going to find. You're going to see like 50 of them right there. So we move fast scouting for these. And you'll see that on that map I showed you about 20 minutes ago of where we went through the burn. You'll see little lines where we're squiggling all around. We're finding them. And you'll see like these long hikes we take through the forest, crossing big swaths of territory, finding the spots. And that's a good time for me to tell you my theory. So this is a theory. I believe that these mushrooms, these burn morel mushrooms, they live with the trees, they live in the roots, in the ground, maybe in the trunk. They live there year round. They live there decades and decades. And when a fire comes along, it creates a weird situation, and they fruit. That's the only time they fruit, for whatever reason. I've got lots of theories on that for another time. But what it seems to me is in Colorado is when I crossed through a forest on a trail, I find spots with morels, and I might go and not see any. And then like, this is beautiful. Why aren't they here? And then you go further over there, and then you find them. It seems like maybe the mycelium is in parts of the forest, but maybe not all parts of the forest is what I feel like. Because it seems like you either find like none, or you find a lot. It's not so often you find one here and one there and one there. I mean, it happens occasionally. It makes me feel like they're kind of concentrated in spots. In some forests, they'll be everywhere. And when conditions are right, they're more likely to be everywhere. But that's how I feel like I'm going to cover a lot of ground when I'm scouting and trying to find an area. We had a question coming in, how not to get lost. Mushroom hunting is very dangerous for getting lost because you're looking at the ground, you're turning around. I personally used a GPS unit from Garmin for a couple of years. Now I use a iPhone-based one. I always start a track when I leave, and I use it. I carry extra charger with me. I always have my map downloaded. I always have a compass, and usually I have a sense like, oh, I got to go west to get home, or which way I have to go if push comes to shove, but I always have my compass with me. I rarely have to use it because I use my phone. And my tip for you, ML, is learn it, but don't learn it in the woods when you're lost. Practice before you get in the woods. Maybe Kristen will share that story. The first time we used the GPS, it wasn't very useful, and we didn't get lost, but we got turned around a lot until we learned how to use it. It's the wrong place to learn how to use it in the field. All right. So when we're in the woods, oh yeah, and we always have walkie-talkies. They're the best. I think that's the best way not to get lost is with when you win somebody, have walkie-talkies, because you often can't hear them. The wind blows, they're next to a creek, they're behind a hill, and you can just call them right up on the walkie-talkie and find them. But you can be yelling and yelling in the forest and not know where they are. All right. So you're driving into the woods, you're driving up the road, you're looking for a place to stop and hunt morels. This is the place you typically want to drive past. And this is a rare place to find mushrooms. No, you certainly, you can find them here. If you did, they would be covered in ash and they would be difficult to clean off and be very gritty, but you would still pick them. But really what this is if you, let me tell you what I'm seeing here. There's ash on the ground. There's no needles or duff. And there's no shade. These trees have been killed pretty hard by the burn. The burn really did a number to everything in the soil, and no needles fell on top of it to hold moisture in. It's an unlikely spot. It requires a lot of precipitation for mushrooms to grow in a place like this in Colorado. I think if you were in Alaska, this would be a good spot, but not here. This is a better spot. It's not ideal. Frankly, I would walk past this one too. And the reason is, even though we've got the beginnings of good territory, we've got duff on the ground. Let me start this up again. Here we go. We've got duff on the ground here a little bit, and we've got brown needles in the trees providing more shade, but it's still pretty open. I would personally like to find a place with a little more protection. But now when the morels are out, they would be, if it had rained a lot and they didn't care, you could find 1,000 down in here. But in Colorado, that's unusual. More than likely, let me go to the next screen here. You're going to really be looking for places like this. There's a lot of cover here. There's a lot of brown on the ground, brown needles that are holding in moisture, which the morels love. There's a lot of shade, keeping the sun off. They love that. I love that there's brown stuff on the ground and the morels are growing on that. They're not growing on dirt and ash. So they're more likely in here to be clean. Rain's not beating on them, splashing ash on them. So I like that about this. They'll grow like in a spot like this. They'll grow all along fallen logs on usually one side or the other, not both. For some reason, somehow the temperature or the moisture is better in there. There's holes in here where these trees burn through. They can be down in the holes, or they might be right out in the open too, especially in great conditions. Here's a similar area, like down underneath these little dead trees would be a very likely place to find some. In fact, they're there. That's why I took the picture. You can't really see them in this picture, but this is also a nice looking forest. So we really focus on finding this type of forest. There's an unburned area back in here. That's great. They'll often kind of reach into the unburned areas because it's moisture in there, but they're still on the roots of the dead trees that are nearby, it seems like. So that patchiness is okay. That also looks like a really nice spot. I would stop and look in. Let's see what else I've got here. I think we're getting good here. I'm good on time. I got a few more slides to show you here. So we've gone through and kind of talked about now when you're in the woods, what you're looking for. And that's going to be, to summarize, brown on the ground, brown in the trees, shade, places to hold moisture is really what you're after once you're in there. Notice how dirty your hands get. One of the things you're going to want to bring with you when you burn morel hunt are something to clean your hands with, like handy wipes and hand moisturizer. These are the spores that come off the mushrooms, and you can't see it here, but boy, they're really hard on your fingers. And after a couple of days, you lose your fingerprints. They kind of wear off. Here we are. This is actually in Oregon. You can see by those big pondos behind us. But on the left is a basket we use a lot. And one of the things that when you're out hunting is, you got to take care of these guys. Usually after we pick them, we want to lay them out and kind of get them clean if we can. And then either we want to spread them in a hanging basket like this so they get lots of airflow if we're camping, or we'll maybe put them in paper bags or baskets and put them in a real cool, dark area, like along a creek. So they might stay nice, but you'll want to take care of them. If you're not careful with your mushrooms, they will get funky. You'll see these bugs sometimes. I never remember the names of them. They tend to live on the outside of the mushroom, not the inside. This particular bug, they don't like tunnel into it. It's more like where they live on. You don't usually eat them, but when you're finding these, they're kind of annoying, because if you pick these with bugs on them and take them home, I'm just here to tell you, every one of those bugs overnight are going to crawl out of the mushrooms, and they're going to crawl all over your house or wherever you're staying. You will have 1,000 of these little bugs spreading out into your zone, and there's no harm to them. But the bugs are annoying. And they're usually a sign of older mushrooms. So when we do find the bugs, usually it's kind of dry. You're on the tail end of the pick. Go up higher in elevation, you might find less bugs. Worst case scenario, you blow them off. You know, they don't ruin the mushrooms. But those are about the only bugs we find in burn morels here. And I say this because a lot of people around the country have problems with bugs in their morels. And my experience has been that most places you pick burn morels, you're not going to have bugs burrowing in, occasional bugs for sure. But you're not going to have like your morels just being eaten by bugs like crazy. You will see that on the West Coast, especially at lower elevations. But out here, it's not a problem. So you don't have to rinse your morels in salt water to get the bugs off. You hopefully don't even have to wash them, because you pick them in that, brown duffy area and they don't have ash on them. You can just pick them clean, cut the bottoms off, if there's any little of these bugs off, blow them off before you put them in your bag, and you'll be good. Spring jacks. I like that. Robert, spring jacks, he called these. They look like little sesame seeds. They're just annoying more than anything else. You got to have your permits. I've already talked about that. Make sure you get your permits and you're compliant there with the law. Kristen's telling the story on the chat there. We had spring jacks. The hotel hated us. Although we did find after that, we'd leave them in the bathtub on purpose because they couldn't get out of the bathtub as easily as everything else. Here's an example of a picture that was in the paper a few years back. We actually hunted out there that year, and we were on this burn where they pick these, and a very high elevation burn. We were there the first week of June, and it was too early. And what happened is right around July 4th, there was this big fire in the Crater Lake National Park. There was also on the fringes of the park. You could pick it legally in quite a few places, but people started picking morels. And this was July 4th weekend. The picture of 234 pounds of morels that the the National Park Service confiscated. I think there were 13 people that were written tickets. So this was 13 people that got tickets, and a few of them got some big ones because I think they had picked a lot. So the moral is, these Park Service guys are serious. If you pick in the park and there is a burn in Rocky Mountain National Park, don't pick there. It's not worth it. Now, safety first. So let's talk about that here on slide 34. The fires, I think the kind of routine risk in the fire, number one, that's not in here, you get lost, you're going to have a strategy for that. The roads can be dangerous. I didn't mention that in here, but we travel with a chainsaw in case a tree falls across the road. The last thing on here, wind. When it gets windy, we get out of the forest. Being in these burn forests is pretty creepy. When the wind blows, and I don't want to go. That's not how I want to go by having a tree fall on me. I think the more routine day to day are these deep hidden holes. What happens are the fires burn these trees. They get down into the root systems. And I think they must burn those roots for weeks, months. Like I think some of them burn here through the winter, even potentially, if there's not enough snow. In fact, they have that going on in the California burns right now. Trees still smoldering from the last year because they haven't had rain. But they get in and they burn the roots out. Now, those holes offer an enormous opportunity, especially when it's dry. You can pick a lot of morels by walking around the burn and looking in every hole. Like you got to get in there and look, like really look, because they'll be upside down on the bottom of the little hole, and they will be in there. In the holes when it's really dry, but the real risk is you can step on them and they go like knee deep and you can hurt yourself. So I think one thing you want to be careful for, these hidden holes, knee injuries are a real risk. The other like life-ending risk is going to be the flash floods and the mud. If you got good rain coming, I wouldn't want to be in there. A hard rain and flash floods and mud, ash is really a bad combination. And a lot of times you see that on the roads too. So just because you're in your car doesn't mean you're safe. The roads can get washed out really quick. Rattlesnakes, no, not so much here in Colorado. We're fortunate, especially at the elevations we're talking about. I don't think you're going to have any rattlesnakes at all in any of these forests. So I don't think I'd worry about rattlesnakes in like the least. Trying to think what else you should be scared about in the forest, but that's probably about it. The wind is probably the one that gets us out the fastest. So to wrap up, another little safety talk. You guys know these are not Morels. And you can see, hopefully enough. And if you don't know why these aren't Morels, I think you want to ask yourself the question, maybe I'm not quite ready to get out there yet and hunt Morels. It's like poker. If you don't know who the sucker is at the table, it's you. Well, this is not a morel. It's a beautiful mushroom, though. This is not a morel either. I don't want to get into the edibility of it, but this was found in Colorado. And interestingly, when we see these, we're too high in elevation. I feel like these run a couple of weeks earlier than the burn morels do. So if I see these, that means I'm either too early or I got to drop down and look at some lower elevations. But a couple etiquette ideas. If there's other pickers in the woods, one of the best things you can do is just kind of look at their lines and stay clear of their lines. Don't like walk right in front of the direction they're going. Don't leave trash. In fact, man, take a trash bag and pick up some trash. Only pick where it's permitted. Common courtesy. Just be nice to people. I think you should share. These morels come up in huge numbers. And, give them away to people is a good way to go. Take someone new. I think the other fun thing about these there's not like a secret spot. I mean, these are burns. In a year, so we didn't talk too much about that. You can hunt them for 3 years, for sure, probably longer, but they wane over a 3-year period. That said, I think it's like a roulette wheel. A first-year burn, you got red and you're going to hit it half the time. You got pretty good odds. A second-year burn is instead of like playing red or black, you might be playing less numbers on the roulette wheel to hit it. But you can still hit it really big, and if conditions are good, that's important. And the other thing that seems to be a contributing factor to a year 2 burn is what was year 1 like. So the conventional wisdom, which I think is right, is that if it didn't go off in year 1, like it was too dry, like everything last year, year 2, it might be good. So I think this is a good year to be looking at year 2 burns in Colorado because it was so dry last year. We like hunting older burns because nobody's ever in them. They're quiet. There's a lot more life in them. But we don't like hunting older burns. There's a lot more life in them. There's a lot more grass. It's harder to spot the morels. And we haven't done as well in 2nd and 3rd year burns, although we have had good luck and it's been worth our while. And I wouldn't discourage you from checking them out. Alyssa, definitely down there in the riparian. I would be cautious of rattlesnakes, but thank goodness we don't have to worry about them up in the higher elevations. So there's a little etiquette. I want to wrap up with a few of the things we like to take. I already talked about walkie-talkies. I think are probably the biggest safety tool we have. I use the cheapest ones I could find. They're low range. I mean, I only need to talk 1,000 feet away. I need to talk to Kristen, not like 6 miles. So we just go with cheap ones that I'm not fearful of losing. I like the rechargeable type. I like the really small ones that are just easy to carry around. Wet wipes and hand lotion, I love it. I hate getting out of a burn and forgetting that. I like to bring a hanging basket. I like to have a tarp, a chainsaw. I like a proper mushroom hunting knife. And other people are like, I like to use a butter knife and whatever. I'm just telling you guys, when you're picking 5 gallons or 10 gallons of morels, having a brush on the end of your knife is a lot quicker than having 2 tools and going back and forth. It's easier to cut cut and this than it is to have two tools. So get a brush on the end of your knife. It's way faster for this type of hunting because you are going to be picking a lot of them. I like a mesh bag. It does release spores. I tend to like it more because it also dirt falls out the bottom instead of milling around with the bottom inches of your morels. It falls out the bottom, so you get cleaner mushrooms, and also airflow goes through it. So depending on the weather, they're going to keep better. And I really like to have a shoulder strap when you do this kind of hunting, and you've got your, a lot of morels. They get really heavy, and when you're out in the woods and they're going off, and you want to get a lot, you got to be ready to carry them out. So bring an extra bag, and inside your extra bag, put another extra bag, because when these things go off, you're going to want to walk out with more than you thought you would. They're hard to leave behind. So bring an extra bag. Some people want to talk about the sustainability of these mushrooms. And I say that because as far as I can tell, there's very little sustainability issues with these mushrooms. There's an interesting article, I don't know, came out a couple of years ago. They did a big survey of burn areas and decided that it didn't really seem to affect them being harvested. And they recommended allowing even more commercial harvesting of these mushrooms, the scientists did, but with additional study as well. But they don't seem to really care. And frankly, my experience is there's so many billions of them out there that, nobody picks them all, and nobody gets to that hill and that hill and that hill and that hill. We just picked these 2 acres right here. So there seem to be plenty out in the woods. I wouldn't worry too much about, bringing home 20 or 50 or 80 pounds of them from a sustainability standpoint. Are there other edible mushrooms that might be found? No, there's actually not. Out farther west, you're going to find spring porcini with burn morels or nearby, which is thrilling and fun to hunt for. But here in Colorado, I don't think we've ever really found anything significant we want to eat. You might find some oyster mushrooms potentially up there, but I don't ever recall seeing others. In fact, it's kind of funny. There's not a lot of life in the burn forest. I mean, you would think there is, and sometimes we see more than others, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of animal tracks. There's not a lot of birds. You're not seeing a lot of animal sign. And, I think it's kind of obvious. It's been burned. There's not a lot of food there. A year 2 burn is a totally different story. It's full of life. It's like a buffet. There's fresh stuff growing everywhere. It's if I was a deer or an elk or whatever, I would want to be in a second year burn. But the first year burn is not a lot of forage for wild animals. So we don't tend to see too many animals in the burns like you would think. Although we often have our dogs with us, so that's not a great way to see animals. So hopefully we'll see you out there. This picture on the left is fun. We found this nest in a burn here. That's in Colorado. I don't know what kind of bird it is. And then we like to use these e-bikes to get up into burns and up these trails. That's a bunch of burn morels in the back of our e-bikes ready to be kind of ridden out of a burn. So there we are. It's a great time. If anybody has any follow-up questions, now would be the time to put them out there. We still, Brian, I think Brian and Jennifer, and I don't know who else is on here.
Hey, how you doing?
Weigh in here with some. Hi.
Yeah, well, that was a great talk. Really fun mushroom hunting with the both of you, and wonderful information. Hopefully we'll get places. They're pretty far from Colorado Springs this year for us in the Pikes Peak Club, but I think we're planning, with NAMA up in Granby, maybe we'll get to see some stuff up there, and friends with private property. And it looks like the Mullen Fire is probably our closest open spot, and maybe only a week or 2 out.
Yeah. So, Brian, and I'd love if you weigh in here. You have a lot of experience, especially down in your area. Anything that you would want to add to help people find the mushrooms? Let me just do this real quick, and I'll share the map for everybody. Here's the state map, and I have. I'm just going to show you my favorite top burns. Here they are: Mullen, Up here, it's 279 square mile burn. I love this one. It's one of the best in the West. Cameron Peak, I love this one. 322 square miles. East Troublesome, another good one. I don't get quite as excited about it, but it looks interesting. Williams Fork, and down here near Glenwood, we've got the Grizzly Creek, which also has some good tree cover in it. Some of the things I would love to learn from Colorado is ponderosas and pines and Doug firs. How do people do in those three trees? Do you have any specific experience that you could share with those particular trees? How do they work for you? The other interesting question is we have these beetle kill forests, and a lot of people say, oh, that burn morels don't do well in beetle kill, and I don't know if they do or not. I don't have experience, and I wonder, how some of these forests that have a lot of beetle kill, will they produce burn morels? I don't know if any of you guys have any thoughts on that are here.
I definitely think the potential's there. It's really just like you said, it's a moisture, and is there enough case? Is there enough needle duff there, so it's not a escape? Have held there for 75 to 100 years. They wait for that moment with the burn, and then it's just the moisture. Did it get snow and the other conditions? Jennifer and I scouted up, drove through the Cameron Peak fire, which is a closed Forest Service, but we made it all the way up into the edges of the Mullen fire to find out that we were about 2 to 3 weeks early, and the roads were still closed by snow, which is, they talk about the snowy peaks and the snowy mountain range and the Never Summer range. Those places have tremendous potential, I think, this year, and they should fruit well into July, maybe even well into August. And I think that the Medicine Bow and the Route National Forest, from what I understand, are still open places. There's checkerboard at BLM in there too. And it's some long distance from us, but there's a lot of open camping. And I'm not sure about all the rules in Wyoming, but I think when I go back up there in the middle to the end of June, that I'm definitely going to investigate where to get permits in Wyoming and all of that, and see if it's the same as Colorado. And,
it is, Brian, you have access to the maps. We do have the links in the maps to the permits if it helps you.
Yeah, the map is really way to go. Jennifer got Wild Forager or Modern Forager maps, and we used those to look at the boundaries, and then we drove up there. That's really helpful to see that if you're not familiar with where the burns were. So that was a really helpful thing. And then just waiting for the roads to open from the snow. And Wyoming, they said after Memorial Day weekend, a lot of the campgrounds and parks and places open up, but we're not open in 2 weeks ago when Jennifer and I drove up there and looked around.
Yeah, well, it's promising, and everybody heard it's Mullins could be an exciting fire going into August if we continue to get rain. And it's so much. I've been watching the rain patterns for like 6 weeks. There's so many storms that have flowed through, kind of between like Fort Collins and that fire hitting the edges of the big Cameron Peak burn and the Mullen. Those areas have gotten good precipitation for the last 6 weeks.
The top of Cameron Pass still had 8 to 9 feet of snow on the side of the road. So
that's great news.
It was really incredible. And down south, so you discussed second, third year burn. I don't know what year it is now on the Spring Creek fire in Levita, outside Levita, Colorado. This might be year 4 or 5, but tremendous rains down there and tremendous rains down on the New Mexico, Colorado state line. Some of those places that didn't get rain the first year, if this is their third year, they may still have potential. I don't know. That just takes jumping in the car and doing a long drive, but there's always mushrooms out there. But none are more exciting to find than that's just so many mushrooms. We got to do the Levita fire with, that was all very rewarding.
Hey, Brian, I'm going to jump in here real quick. You're breaking up on us. I think we lost a little internet there. Levi had a good question, and you mentioned it about BLM. And when I researched the two big fires, Cameron Peak and East Troublesome, and some of the Western fires too, the BLM land inside the perimeter had the same closure rules as the Forest Service. Mullen was open, so that was not a factor. And I know the Forest Service updated their closure rules, and I don't know if the BLM is still in lockstep, but as of now, the BLM and the Forest Service had the same rules. So technically you couldn't go in the forest and pick BLM. As a technicality, I don't want to go any more beyond that. It's up to you and everybody listening, kind of how you deal with rules.
Well, it's really, really important, and that's the best reminder we can tell the public is we absolutely have to check. I don't want to see anybody get $400 or $500 ticket to get 20 pounds of Morels out of the woods, or try to. And so we really have to check every place, and BLM is more under one management roof than the Forest Service is. But if it's checkerboarded inside Arapahoe National Forest or Roosevelt National Forest where it's closed, they may agree to also close. So we must check with the Forest Service in each and every Forest Service, and in the BLM in those counties and places too. So that's real important. There's really, you'd be really bummed out if you drove all the way up there, picked a handful of Morels and got a $500 ticket. It would leave a really, more than ash in your mouth, it would leave a really bad taste. And so we have to be good stewards of the Forest Service so that we don't lose rights in the future. And some of these are danger zones where there are a lot of falling trees or high wind, and the rest of it's not real clear to us why these forests are closed, but they are what they are, and those are federal organizations. And talk about not being able to fight City Hall. Maybe not this year, but next year, if they don't reopen, we could create some sort of lobby to show them the value of having the Forest Service open. But without getting political, like you said, the best thing we can do is call each Forest Service and each ranger district to find out what are the rules in June of 2021.
Yeah, I personally think they're going to be under a lot of pressure from the tourism entities in the towns surrounding there. That that happened in Glenwood. Hanging Lake is in that burn, and they got that burn opened up pretty quick near us. Grizzly Creek is open, but I think a lot of these towns like Grand Lake, I mean, they must be like, hey, you got to open this stuff up. We got campgrounds and all this recreation here. You can't close everything. So hopefully they'll open them up to people like us that want to mushroom hunt. I, for one, don't like to take the risk. I almost use it as an opportunity to like, hey, I'm going to go learn new things in new places and try something new rather than go bang my head on a burn that is closed, trying to get into it personally. But, to each their own.
All right.
Oh, Chris Jones is on there. Hi, Chris. He's a master burn morel hunter.
Hi, Chris.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's what keeps me out of burns always, is that they're always closed right after, the year after. And so it's hard to find a place with access in general. So one of my questions was how many years, and you said 3 years. And I could see that second year being a good year just because of more stuff coming up, but then also, the access becomes more available after the second year.
Yeah, it does. And the other thing is, like, you're not a commercial picker. Like, if you're like me, you go into a third year burn, it's beautiful, it's a fun experience, and you get a gallon or two of Morels and you're excited about it.
That would be great.
That's okay. I don't need to make my living picking. So, I think a third year burn is worth going, as long as you have the caveat that if the conditions aren't right, there's not going to be there either,
Totally. And just want to say thank you for doing the presentation. I think it was great, very educational. I had some questions at the beginning, but you answered them all throughout the presentation. I really like your maps. I think that's really cool how you separated all the trees and everything. I never really thought about it that way. I mean, I think about it in elevation, zones going up, but I never thought about having a map where you could separate all the trees and the different ones. And that was really cool to see. I also use the Forest Service map. I use an app called US Topo Maps, and a lot of people don't track or look at that stuff, but you can see where there's gates, where there's closures, where there's old roads and trails, and stuff that's been there for years. And the Forest Service map is very, very handy. And I love to use that and track where I go, just like you had all your tracks. And it was really cool to see all your tracks through that one burn where you went over and over and over again, because that's a lot of what I do. Everywhere we go, I'll map and just track everything we do, and then I'll mark waypoints where I find things and go back years later and use that for reference. So I think it's really good. I think it's great.
And I should shout out to Chris. He's on this. It looks like the chat. Some of those tracks are his, and it was fun to hunt with other people where we tracked and they tracked, and we would trade our tracks at night and know, like, oh, you guys did this. We're going to do the next section tomorrow. What are you going to do? And it was kind of fun to coordinate with other hunters using that app. And somehow, if you ever get in that situation where there's a group of you hunting, man, it's nice to have apps where you all can then sync together and see, learn from each other's trails.
Right.
We learned so much doing that with other people 2 years ago on the Lake Christine burn.
I've never actually
Chris would go somewhere I wouldn't think about, and he'd find mushrooms, and he'd be like, oh, let's try that area too.
I've never actually synced, my maps with other people, and I never even really thought about doing it, because usually I'm the guy who's tracking, and nobody else does. So, and I do it for other things too, not just mushroom hunting. But if you have any pointers on that or any specific apps you can use to trade tracks together, I think that would be great to know too.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. I love Gaia. I'd love to do it's almost like 2 classes mapping. One is like what to do at your desktop, and one is what to do in the field to use your apps. That would be a fun class. I prefer Gaia. I think Onyx is just as good for people that like it. The one that's kind of the one that's coming up, I think CalTopo is probably the most exciting in the industry right now. And that's coming out of that like fire rescue, people, hikers. It has some amazing capabilities that these other maps aren't really doing right now. So I'm probably most geeked out about the data I'm able to get in CalTopo versus other maps right now.
That's cool. Yeah, people often ask me, like, what app are you using? And it works on Android, the one I use, but they don't make it for iPhones, so they're all different. But I've used Onyx too, but that's I've used that more for actual hunting of like big animals and stuff, where it's very helpful, but especially with the private one.
I want to show one more thing here. Robert asked a question. I didn't address it. I did talk about burn intensity a little bit, which is this idea that places that are fully burned don't produce near as well. Now what I want to show you was this map here. Some of these maps here, this is East Cameron. Some of the burns release burn data maps, and you can Google these and find them. But this is the Cameron Peak one. And if you zoom in, it color codes the severity of the burn. Like red is not great. Yellow and turquoise are what you want more. And you can kind of find burn severity, do a little research that way. My problem with it is I've often, as I go in the field, I feel like these maps aren't always right. Like in the red, there might be great areas, or in the yellow, there might be 2 burnt areas, but they do have these maps that you can study. And I have attached those to any of the burns that they had the maps before I attached them into our map product. So if they're there, they're there. They only do it for about half the burns that I was able to find. And some states had all, and some states had none. So Robert, thanks. Good question.
Yeah, another one that I use is the InsaWeb website. When there are actual burns, and you can see, the fire maps and how they expand and everything. So That's a good one to go and find previous burns as well. Has a lot
Yes.
of information.
Yeah, and the InstaWeb too, if you dig deeper into the burn, they'll have these maps, and they'll have fire progression maps, and they'll have a lot of other stuff in there. And some of them will even have like video, like there was a burn near us that they had a helicopter fly over, and there was like a whole helicopter tour of the video, which for me was like invaluable because I could see what the forest looked like before going out. And that was a fire up near Meeker.
Okay.
So you never know, if you dig into that InstaWeb, into their little content area, you can find some gems. The problem with InstaWeb is it's a hard place to start. It's usually where I go and I'm like, okay, I want to learn about this fire versus where am I going to go? If it's like, where am I going to go? InstaWeb is hard because you kind of got to like hunt and peck through it.
Dig
It's not
around,
like-
yeah. I
it's
think
not
I've
like
used
all
it
of them.
in a different way, more of when an active fire is there and watching it to see where it's actually
Yes.
at, you know.
Yeah, that's where you go in August when you want to see what's going on.
Awesome.
What else
I
have you
love
guys
maps.
got? Any questions?
Very
I do too.
great information from all of you. Huge shout goes out to Alyssa, our super board member, secretary extraordinaire. Has really kept us together strong this year. Over 30 members at the first foray last Sunday, and just tons more great stuff coming for the Pikes Peak Club. And wow, Trent, great presentation. James, our super 4-8 leader, and just really excited that we're having a moist spring for once in 3 years. So looking forward to all of it. And thanks again, everybody. That was pretty awesome.
1 second. James, did you have a 4A announcement for us?
Yes, we're trying to set up a foray for this Sunday. We're still trying to figure out where to go, so we're still scouting. Been scouting every other day or so, and you know, hopefully we find something good that we can all enjoy. So
stay tuned for that. I guess what
we will
he's
stay
saying.
tuned.
And t-shirts. We still have t-shirts for sale, everybody. $25. Let me know if you want one. I'll get you hooked up. They're on the website at pikespeakmike.org/shop. Thank you for coming, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Trent. That was
Thanks,
awesome.
Chris.